everyone. Coming back and talking about the guidelines which we actually have to follow for effective written communication, let's see what and how do they affect the written communication. When we are talking about a personal or a business settings, we need to make sure about the effectiveness and the efficiency of communication through the written medium. When we are talking about written communication, it can take many forms. We've already read about them multiple times. Emails, texts, memos, white papers, letters, etc. No matter what format you're using, there are a few basic rules that one needs to follow. So when we're talking about these basic rules, we have to ensure that written communication is always correct, to the point, and effective. The first rule comes out to be simplicity. Simplicity means simple sentences to be used. For example, if I have to convey about my nature towards my boss, and I have to give a reason for the same to my friend on a text message, I have to simply say, I hate my boss, full stop. My boss hates me too. This relationship is a little complex, but here I would want to inform you that the relationship amongst us is not at all like any other normal relationship. Now, if you see, my first sentence is to my second sentence is to my third sentence, the complexity of my sentence increases. The first two sentences are really short, crisp, to the point. I'm trying to convey exactly in limited words what I mean. But if you see the second half of the sentence, that is quite complex. Multiple thoughts running there in one sentence. Here, I have to make sure that I keep my sentence concise and to the point. Instead of saying that I would want to, schedule a meeting to discuss the pertinent facts of the case at your earliest conviction or convenience, I can easily say, please let me know when can we meet to discuss the given case. Here, if no one is aware about what the case is, there is where my problems would start arising. Why? Because I'm talking about a case that no one is aware of, so the timings, the simplicity, etc. would be a cause of major concern. Talking about point number 2 is avoiding jargons. There are a lot of technical jargons as well as language jargons which are not supposed to be used. They're supposed to be used when you're communicating in-house, wherein everybody is aware about their usage. Everybody needs to understand the message. Supposingly, I have an in-house system which is called LMS, which is Learning Management Software. It's only supposed to be used within the organization because people only within the organization would be aware about this terminology. If I say that if I'm writing to a supplier who's outside my organization who doesn't know about this technical term, and I write in my email to him that, you'd find the required details over LMS. One, great cause of confusion here. Why? Because I am talking about something which my supplier or the end user is not aware of. Second, when I'm talking about something that the supplier or the end user or the person who's receiving is not clear of, confusion begins. He might interpret it or she might interpret it in his or her own way. Here, when we're talking about all these things, we have to make sure that the written communication should be accessible to my audience, no matter who you are communicating with. Technical language and jargons should be avoided, and simple language should be used. The third rule says being specific. When I'm talking about specificity, the details that I have to give have to be limited. Otherwise, all information is leading to information overload. It becomes ambiguous. People are unclear about the detail. They tend to, fail to understand what basic things are being talked about. Instead of writing, I have a lot of experience working in this field. Which field? We don't know, right? I have worked as an engineer for 3 years or 3.5 years. So here, we are talking about being specific in terms of numbers, being specific in terms of the information being conveyed. The first statement, if you see, is actually ambiguous. My subject is I, but has a lot of experience in what? Still unclear. Being conversational. Here, when we're talking about being conversational, we're talking about how to engage the other person who's my reader into a conversation in the form of that written communication. It's not academic or technical writing that I'm talking about, my scholarly writing, that, it has to be to the point, it has to be specific, it has to be in a conversational tone where it seems that the person is telling stuff. As a rule of thumb, write similar fashion as we talk. So when we're talking about all these things, make sure that you're reading your message aloud before you are sending it. You'd get to know whether that is in a conversational tone or not. Talking about the fifth one is the usage of pronouns. As you saw in the previous sentence that we were reading in option number 3, use of the pronoun I, he, she, it, they, etc. are only supposed to be used once you've defined your subject. Here, when we are talking about the pronouns as a whole, there's one important factor to be considered. Avoid attaching masculine or feminine pronouns to your writing. Example, when we are talking about technical grammar, we use he or his when gender is unknown, or when we are referring to a group of people. The language may offend some people. That's the reason every time he slash she. To be on the safe side, do not use a gendered pronoun unless you're sure of the person's gender you're referring to. Number 6 is use of active voice. Why is it that we have to avoid using passive voice and use active voice? The basic reason is that active voice makes my sentences shorter, more meaningful, and easy to read. When we choose the active verb in place of the passive, it adds a lot of interest to my written communication. I drove to the beach on Sunday. Simple sentence. I am doing what my verb is describing is driving. When everything is mentioned, which day, which place, if I convert it into the passive form, when I was driving to the beach on Sunday, if I convert the same sentence into the passive form would be quite elaborate with a lot of words and would make reading complex. Using the active voice will also allow me to understand, and it'll make my written communication more conversational. Coming to the next one, which is being personable. By being personable, we're talking about when we know the person we are writing to, acknowledge his relationship, and instead of using blanket pronouns such as you, he, she, etc., use the person's name there. Make the information you include in your written communication pertinent to the readers. It should be easily available, it should be easily accessible and understandable to the reader. Depending on the relationship that you have with the person, begin as well as end your written communication with appropriate greetings, which is most important. The medium selection. When we're talking about the medium selection, we have to make sure that we're choosing the right medium for the written communication, whether that be an email, that be a text, or messaging or letters. It all depends on whom we are actually writing and what is it that has to be conveyed. If we have never ever used text messaging or any other form that we've just spoken about in work environment, it may be the best way to correspond with the co-worker. But when it talks about an email, that's more professional, that makes it more official. The 9th pointer is humor. When we're talking about humor, mostly people think that when we're writing an official email or when we're talking about any written piece of communication, we have to make sure that all these things are limited and stuck to one point, that is being very formal. Yes, we have to be formal, but there are supposed to be things that are supposed to be included in it, which is humor. So we have to use humor, but it doesn't mean that the entire conversation or the entire letter turns out to be humorous. We have to use humor in moderation. Here, when we're talking about in moderation, we have to use it appropriately. When we're talking about humor, if we're writing to a person who's unfamiliar, not very familiar to me as a reader, that is where I need to avoid adding humor. In case the person gets offended, that's going to be a big, big, big problem. But in case if I have a good relationship with my readers, that is where I am free to use humor in my written communication. Even if I know the reader well, I am not supposed to offend the reader through humor. The 10th pointer is proofreading. When I'm talking about proofreading as a whole, no matter how good I am at writing, it is critical to proofread. There should not be any spelling or grammatical errors in my piece of writing because it conveys a very negative impact otherwise. Make sure that whatever I am writing is written effectively. The communication is what purpose I have written for, that purpose is conveyed conveniently to the end user. I have to avoid using confusing language. Why? Because when I'm using confusing language, that misleads my entire communication. It breaks down the interest of the reader, and it also creates a lot of confusion. There are a lot of barriers between the writer and the reader that are added here. Words that are ambiguous, bombastic, vague, trendy, exaggerated, inflated, and archaic have to be avoided. It's always better to use familiar words, common words, general words, wherein it's easy for the reader to understand whatever we are trying to convey. The concrete word to the abstract, the single word to the entire curriculumation of the short word to the long one. The 12th pointer is to avoid overloading information. In one sentence, many times people try adding a lot of connectors and a lot of commas or semicolons, and they try including and adding a lot of meaning to the sentence, which is incorrect. Information overload is ideally giving excess information to the readers, wherein the reader gets all the more confused. His attention span decreases, and there are problems between the reader and the sender again. This may also create frustration, wherein the reader wouldn't want to read further and would even doubt the credibility of the writer. As a writer, you must decide what sort of information is needed when we're talking about creating an outline before actually beginning to write, and make sure that you're following it with clear ideas, you're being concise, and you're sharing relevant written work. Let's discuss the important ways in which you can improve your written skills. When we're talking about improving your written communication skills, first we need to identify what is the goal or the purpose. Why are we writing it? Why is it that we're sharing this piece of information with the reader? Brushing up my basics is very much required here. That means I should be clear with all my WH questions. What, why, when, where, and how. Include only the required details. I do not have to over-exaggerate or add a lot of things to make the person understand. Keeping my language extremely simple, classic is what is all that is needed. Use outlines to streamline things. That means creating an outline before you're actually penning down stuff. Use a professional tone. Again, taking you back to the pointer of humor, unnecessarily adding stuff would create a kind of distance between you as a writer and the person who's reading it. Proofread and edit. That's the most important part, because if there are any grammatical errors or errors in sentence structure or unnecessary capitalizations or spelling errors or punctuation errors, that creates a negative impact over the reader. The final thing here is understanding email writing. When we are talking about emails, emails are methods which are comprising of composing, sending, storing, as well as receiving messages over the electronic medium. Here, We are talking about those mediums wherein we are communicating with people not face to face through the written medium, but over the internet. Email stands for electronic mail, that is the E and mail. It is the most preferred means of communication because it's cheapest as well as fastest. There are basically two types of email. One, the formal, and the next one, informal. These are only the two broad categories that we'd be focusing on in this given module. The other categories would be discussed in the forthcoming modules. When we are talking about formal emails, you all must have written them at one point in time in your life. So when we are talking about formal email writing, that is where we have to stay focused on a few things. One, these emails can be written to companies, colleagues, government departments, offices, school principals, teachers, newspaper editors, etc. Talking about emails as a whole, emails are the most commonly used means of communication. They are the fastest, immediate delivery, and they allow you to interact with all kinds of businesses within and beyond the national boundaries. When I'm talking about formal emails here specifically, we are going to talk about their rules, the formats, and the examples. So when I'm talking about all these things, the first thing comes out to be the anatomy of a good email. When we are talking about a perfect email, that is where we are talking about the right way to present information, the perfect email. Here, it all depends on what are you wanting to convey through this email and how it gets noticed. Again, your outline creation, your proofreading, your sentence structure, all these components that we've been reading about so far are going to come to play. However, the key elements that are common to all emails is the purpose. One should have clarity for the purpose that we are writing the email for. The structure for all high quality emails is very simple yet efficient, and it provides the clearest message to all my clients. If the message is not clear, that means my email is not at all effective. For the most part, when we're talking about the anatomy of a good email, we have to keep in mind the following things: the header, the body, and the footer. The header is basically where I'm talking about my upper portion, the body of my email. The body concludes or talks about my basic information being provided. And the conclusion is basically when I'm talking about how do I finish writing this one. The following things are included in email, which is subject line. The subject is ideally the first piece of information that the recipient is going to see in this email. And if it's written correctly, it's accurate. But if it's written incorrectly or it's unclear, it could push the readers to delete it without even opening it. So it's important to give it a clear and precise message right from the beginning till the end. The next comes out to be my style in which I am writing. Unlike many other languages which require like creating complex sentences and giving a lot of meaning or adding a lot of meaning, here in English language, we keep it very basic and we keep it very simple. We also have to make sure that we're adding the required courtesy formulas, wherein we are writing an email in English. You are not using any other language, neither are you using technical jargons, keeping it very simple. The last out of all is my entire proofreading, wherein no grammatical mistakes should be there, no spelling mistakes should be there. Sentences shouldn't be ambiguous, they should be short, crisp, to the point, conveying the right amount of information. And finally, we end with the signatures, wherein we have to make sure that I have my email set. That is where I'm going to write my full name along with the last name, my job title, relevant details that I want to share with that person, and link to my company's website, which is going to have my association with my brand. So keeping in mind all these elements that were presented here, which are essential for, writing an email, it is that we have to make sure that all parts are followed with the right frame of mind. We have to make sure that it is completely dependent on the following things. In the introduction, when we are talking about what kind of a relationship is it that this person shares with us, we can write dear Miss, Mrs. or Miss only if we have surety of the person we are writing to. And we make sure that we begin with the last name. So I'm talking about Miss Oberoi, if I'm talking about Miss Gupta, Mrs. Gupta, etc. Dear sir or madam is preferred if you don't know the name of the recipient or we're writing a general email to whomsoever it may concern. After the initial greetings, you need an introductory sentence, which is actually stating that indicating how or what do you wish to convey. If I'm writing about the introduction, there are several sentences that can be used here, like I am writing with regards to, you're referring to something in writing. I'm writing in connection with, you're talking about the main topic. I am writing in reference to. On the other hand, if you're writing an email to send information, you can start with, any of these sentences like I am writing to let you know, or I am delighted to tell you, or I regret to inform you. In case you're writing an email wherein instead of doing something else, you're replying. So here, I am writing in response to, I'm writing in reply to, or I'm writing to thank you for. When we come to the main body of the text, that is where we are telling the following things. There are no conventional formulas here as such that we are replying. Here is just, we are analyzing the situation and we are making inferences. So based on the type of message that we are trying to frame in this email, there are various ways to write a final invitation. Like, I look forward to hearing from you soon. Thank you in advance. For further information, please contact me, and then the details follow. Please let me know if you have any questions. Thank you for your attention. And finally, in the conclusion, the most common ways to conclude your entire email are best regards, kind regards, yours faithfully, if in case you begin the email with dear sir and ma'am because you don't know the name of the recipient. Yours sincerely, again, if you begin an email with dear Mr., Miss, Mrs. and the surname. And final one that we always use, regards. So here, I hope with this, you've got a fair idea of the introduction, the main body, and the conclusion. The importance of email and written communication is actually explained through this situational analysis. Let's assume that you're invited to an interview for a job that's ideal for you. You don't set an alarm the night before, you wake up late and roll out of bed with no time to prepare. You throw on your dirty clothes that you wore yesterday, and you grab a slice of cold pizza for breakfast, but you haven't brushed your hair. Is it possible? No. You're going for an interview. You have to be prepared for the same. Same is the situation for written communication. Written communication means a proper purpose, organization, and preparedness. Otherwise, it's going to lead to ambiguous messages. Let's see this another situation. You're invited to your boss's office to talk about an important project. If this project goes well, you could be even promoted. And instead of paying attention to the conversation, you stare out of the window, tap your foot on the floor, and only offer a series of grunts in response to any suggestions that your boss gives. If you behaved like this, definitely you're not being promoted, you're being thrown out of the organization. Similarly, are the situations where people add excessive amount of humor in their written content, which is leading to the other person getting annoyed. When we're talking about the importance of email writing, there are a few skills that are needed there. Email writing ensures effective business communication. Emails help a company contact with employees, partners, and even clients. Your emails must be tailored in a very proficient and precise yet informative way. We have been talking about this ever since the beginning of this module. If my recipient doesn't have clarity or is not understanding my message clearly, the entire means of communication is distorted. Poorly written emails are difficult to be understood by the recipient, and this hampers the business relationships because the person will not write back to tell that it's not clear what you're trying to convey. He or she will understand that it's impossible from the other end to receive any concrete or precise information. Email writing skills help employees make the difference between good and bad employees. Here is the cue point, the key point, the star point for this session. Through email writing skills, it becomes easy for the employer to mark the difference between professional as well as unprofessional employees. Besides knowledge, the employees who are good at composing clear emails are preferred more. They have a great impression on their clients and even the employer. Whereas when we're talking about employees who are not writing, who are not able to convince or are not able to convey their thoughts through written medium, is where they fail and flounder. The employees who can represent themselves in the company in a clear and professional manner are always one notch up. So if you want to excel in life, email writing is something that you will have to learn. To demonstrate your intelligence, that is where even when you're writing, but you're writing with a lot of grammatical errors, or you're not spelling words correctly, or you're not writing in the proper prescribed format, that is where we are talking about how you will fail. Here, these errors can be marked as minor errors, but professionally speaking, they account for a lot and they mark you or demarcate you as a person. Good writers are always reliable for the employers. People who write good emails, great emails, are perceived to be as more reliable and trustworthy by their seniors. So let's suppose that you receive an email full of grammatical errors and words that are not spelled correctly. How do you perceive the sender? You try creating a mental image of the same, and when we're trying to create this mental image, we do see a shabby looking person, and it is a person who's not competent enough to get this task done. You're considered unprofessional or unintelligent, and there are several derogatory remarks that one adds to his or her personality. When I'm talking about the email writing skills, they help to keep good records. Definitely, talking in terms of information records, it is very, very, very essential for a company to maintain these. And because this is basically because my verbal communication is not reliable and it cannot be remembered for a very long period of time. Thus, this written form of communication is always authentic and is always supposed to be stored properly. Email writing skills help in boosting my professional confidence. Once I get that kind of hang, okay, this is how my boss actually motivates me, this is how my boss actually sets me apart. So here is where I'm talking about good writing skills being involved. When your email skills lead to the successful completion of a project, you become all the more confident. Inspiration, satisfaction is what comes in. Why good email writing is vital for your career? This is a basic question that is often asked by candidates. So here, being able to communicate effectively, it's the most important life skill that one can ever have. If you're applying for jobs or you're looking for promotions with your current employer, you will most certainly have this particular term appearing in all JDs. Good communication skills. As your career progresses, the importance of communication skill increases all the more. With the n number of years of experience being added to your profile, this experience counts all the more. Email is how we spend most of our time communicating. So it is supposed to be a great opportunity to learn this concept and to have this as an extra feather in your hat. It gives you 2 hours every day to demonstrate your communication skill to your current employer. But if you have convinced this employer for once, he will have this kind of trust on you every time. Employees who have demonstrated the ability to represent themselves and the company in a clear, compelling, professional, and even competitive environment. That is where they're likely to be chosen for advanced positions. In today's business environment, regardless of the industry, communicating effectively typically means a heavy use of emails, and using emails means you have to have the ability to write. This email is often the first impression that one gets from, in terms of the sender and also in terms of the receiver. You have to make sure that the first impression is always the last impression. You have to leave an impact. And definitely, I'm not talking about negative impact. I'm talking about the positive impact. Getting promoted is also impacted by your writing skills. Good writing skills communicate intelligence, professionalism, and even competency. Poor writing skills, or the poor writing communication, on the other hand, show a lack of intelligence, professionalism, and competency. Once again, when we're trying to imagine the professional image of a person, your writing skills come into mainframe. The better you write, the better your images in terms of chances of promotion and the company. What makes an email effective ideally? When we're talking about effective emails, we're supposed to focus on the following things. 1, focus on the recipient, that is the person who is receiving this message. Arouse attention before they are opened. That means my subject line, which is supposed to be absolutely catchy, get opened and read. That means this email is not supposed to be deleted right from the beginning where the subject line is read. Are kind and respectful. So when we're talking about the use of humor or the use of informal language should be avoided to the maximum extent. Wherever possible, you may include it, but then you have to make sure you're not offending anybody. Are written with correct spellings and grammar, which is again a very, very, very important part. Make the recipient feel good. You have to make sure that you're creating an impact on the recipient. They leave little or no room for any kind of interpretation. You're not supposed to send messages that give you a dual kind of image wherein you are trying to convince, but the other person is trying to think about something else. Are as long as they need to be and not longer just to show that you know the art of writing. Have a clear call to action, means they have a clear purpose as to why they're being sent. When we're talking about the efficiency or the effectiveness of an email, we're talking about the things that make an email effective. My purpose, my language, the way I have proofread them, the way I want to convince my reader. But what is it that actually makes this email ineffective? If my message is too long, or it is complicated, or requires additional discussion, that is where it will not be marked as an effective email. If you want a feedback from your supervisor on your work, or if you're asking for your professor for a question that requires more than a yes or no answer or a simple explanation, you should schedule a meeting instead, because having kind of explanations is quite difficult over email. Email is not an effective means to communicate when we have to keep things private. when it's a kind of impersonal talk wherein you don't want that information to be shared. Next, when you want to convey something which is very emotional, something that's very personal, you would never want to do it through an email. The best way possible here would be a face-to-face conversation. We have to make sure that the message that we're trying here is understood by the final reader. Why? Because when I'm talking about this message, I'm talking about several things. Number one, I am stating the purpose why I'm writing it. I am providing the reader with some kind of an information or context. If you're asking a question, cut and paste any relevant text. For example, computer error messages, assignment prompts you don't understand. You can simply copy the message there, but in other contexts, no copying, no cutting, no pasting. We have to make sure that your message is being understood. If the message is not understood, that is where the entire process goes in vain. The paragraphs should have separate thoughts. Each sentence should be clear, and you have to make sure that when you're writing separate emails, you have to have different questions and different pointers being done there. Finally, you have to state the desired outcome at the end of your message as to what your expectations are. If you're requesting a response, let the reader know that, I am waiting for your response. Or you have to make sure that you're letting the reader know what kind of response is required. For example, an email reply, or possible times a meeting, scheduling a meeting, or a recommendation letter or a supply letter. When we are talking about all these things, it brings us to an end to this module. We'd be continuing with more information about email writing in the upcoming modules. Thank you so much. Stay tuned.